Weirdlings of the jury, today I, Sable Divine, your friendly neighborhood lizard lady, have partnered with the law firm of Nelson Murdoch. I will be defending Loki Lofison. My apologies. Odinson. There will be spoilers, so if you aren't caught up with Loki Season 2, you might want to do that first. Presiding over the case is the Illuminati. Not the one decimated by the Scarlet Witch, but the one for the main continuity, Earth 616. On the panel today are Iron Man, Captain America, Professor X, Mr. Fantastic, Namor, Black Bolt, and Doctor Strange. They are here to ensure the safety of the jury and myself, as my client has engaged in some questionable activities, which we will discuss. I will be defending Loki in absentia, as his duties as the god of storytelling currently require all of his attention, but he has given me his blessing. I will lay out my client's history, according to the MCU, give some mitigating factors, the charges, and my arguments against them. Then, it will be up to the weirdlings of the jury to give a verdict, guilty or not guilty. And remember, if the glove does not fit, you must acquit. Or, in this case, the horned helmet. But it is his helmet. So, forget I said that. Let's get into it. Loki was born around 900 years ago. In the MCU, his father is Laufey. In mythology, Laufey is his mother. Mythology is wild, but that's what makes it fun. At the start of Thor, Odin and the Asgardian forces battle Laufey and the Jotun. The same conflict depicted in What If, where Odin leaves the Tesseract in Tonsberg, later found by Johann Schmidt in Captain America, the First Avenger. When Loki was born, he was small for a frost giant, a Jotun. For whatever reason, maybe they didn't believe he was the rightful heir to the throne, maybe they thought he could never be king, or maybe his size was just a disappointment. Laufey left baby Loki to die. Odin found Loki and, using his magic, changed his natural blue skin to the pinkish hue of the Asgardian royal family. Essentially, he erased Loki's identity and race before Loki ever had a chance to embrace them. We don't know how much Odin told Freya about Loki's origins. What we do know is that Loki was raised believing he was the youngest biological child of Odin and Freya, the spare to Thor's heir. He was doted on by his mother, who taught him magic, and his relationship with her was always closer than it was with Odin. Early in the movie, we see young Thor and Loki. For context, we learn in Infinity War that Thor is about 1,500 years old when he talks to the Guardians of the Galaxy. Since Loki is about 900, the brothers are roughly 600 years apart in age. If they both look like children at the same time, it tells us that Asgardians and Jotun not only age at the same rate, but also reach maturity at the same rate. When we see the adult versions of Thor and Loki, they appear to be in their 30s or 40s. With that in mind, Odin is tens of thousands of years old. In Midgardian terms, that makes him a senior citizen. Thor is like a college-age frat boy, just on the edge of his prefrontal cortex being fully formed, and Loki, he's a teenager, impulsive, immature, and reckless. So, from here on out, until I say otherwise, imagine not Tom Hiddleston Loki, but the variant, Kid Loki. During his interrogation with the TVA, we see a few moments that show just how mischievous the god of mischief can really be. He cuts off a piece of Lady Sif's hair, because he thought it was funny. And have you heard of D.B. Cooper? Well, my client is the one and only hijacker who leapt from a plane with a sack of cash. He didn't do it for malicious reasons. It was a dare that he agreed to, involving Thor and Heimdall. According to the MCU, the money was never found because the Bifrost pulled him back to Asgard. In fact, we do see some of the money fall out of the Bifrost as Loki ascends. When we see adult Thor and Loki for the first time, they've just returned from a battle somewhere in the Nine Realms. Victorious, they arrive just in time for Thor's coronation. As Thor walks down the aisle to become king, Loki stands proudly to support his brother. But then, an alarm sounds. Someone is in Odin's vault. Inside the vault, the Destroyer has already dispatched 2 Jotun, who are attempting to steal the casket of ancient winters. Now, instead of thieves, they look more like the main course for a feast, and you know how much Asgardians love their feasts. In fact, that's how zombie Scarlet Witch turns all of the Asgardians into zombies. They eat zombified flesh, believing it is the most amazing feast ever to be bestowed to the god of thunder and his people. Thor is furious. Loki has broken the treaty. If Thor were king, he'd invade immediately. The Warriors 3, Volstagg, Hogun, and Fandral are all backing him without question. Lady Sif tries to be the voice of reason. And Loki? He half-heartedly says, "No, brother, don't." Heimdall, who sees all and knows all within the 9 realms, comes to Thor and his friends. But instead of stopping them, he says he will open the Bifrost. However, if any of their actions threaten Asgard, they will be on their own. On Jotunheim, everyone but Loki feels the cold. Thor, the Warriors 3, Lady Sif, and Loki are searching for Laufey, so Thor can have a word with them. Laufey entertains his guests for only a few minutes. But then he tells them to leave, and their intrusion will be ignored. It is actually a very gracious act, and it shows just how clear-headed Laufey is. But, just as they're about to leave, one of the Jotun makes a comment that gets under Thor's skin. And, of course, a battle breaks out. During the fight, a Jotun grabs Loki's arm. Both expect it to freeze and shatter, but instead, Loki's skin turns blue. Before Loki can fully process this revelation, Odin opens the Bifrost himself, riding possibly the most amazing horse in the multiverse, Sleipnir. Now, Sleipnir is Loki's son, but with a twist. Loki once transformed into a mare, mated with a stallion, and gave birth to the 8-legged majesty himself. Odin smooths things over with Laufey, ensuring that the treaty between Asgard and Jotunheim remains intact. Once Odin, Thor, Loki, Lady Sif, and the Warriors 3 return to Asgard, Odin begins to lecture them. He tells Thor he is unworthy to be king, that he would have started a war, gotten himself, his brother, and his friends killed. And his punishment? Banishment. Odin opens the Bifrost and sends Thor down to Midgard, putting a spell on Mjolnir, the hammer. Let whoever is worthy have the powers of Thor. Thor arrives on Earth and gets hit by Jane Foster's car. Back on Asgard, the Warriors 3 and Lady Sif are trying to figure out how to get Thor back. Should they talk to Freya, Odin, or ask Loki to petition on his behalf? Now, I'm not sure if this was addressed in the movie, but in the book adaptation, Loki admits that before they left, he informed a guard to tell Odin after they departed. The Warriors 3 call him a traitor. Loki explains, if he hadn't done it, they would have been dead. And he has a point. While Thor is attempting, and failing, to lift Mjolnir on Earth, Loki is searching for his own answers. He goes into Odin's vault and touches the casket of ancient winters, turning his skin back to its original blue hue. Odin comes to speak to him. Loki is hurt, confused, and feeling betrayed. He says, "When I was a child, you told me that frost giants eat babies. I am your enemy." Loki had always felt like an outsider, like Odin loved Thor more, and now he finally understood why. Before Odin can explain, deflect, or respond in any way, he collapses, his age and health finally catching up to him, and he falls into the Odin sleep. Now, if Loki truly despised his father, he would have done nothing, but instead, he catches Odin and calls for his guards. Despite everything, Loki still loves the man who raised him, his father. With Odin in the Odin sleep and Thor banished to Midgard, Loki becomes king. Lady Sif and the Warriors 3 approach Loki on the throne and ask him to revoke Thor's banishment. Loki refuses, saying, "How would it look if I undid the final action of the former king?" But that's not the only reason. If Thor returned, he would take the throne from Loki. Loki then goes to Laufey and admits that he was the one who allowed the Jotun to enter Asgard during Thor's coronation. When asked why, Loki reveals his true heritage. It's a very "Luke, I am your father" moment. Though, fun fact, Vader actually says, "No, I am your father." Thanks to pop culture's game of telephone and endless parodies, the altered line is the one stuck in our collective memory. Laufey is flabbergasted. The weak infant he left to die is now king of Asgard? And with Odin defenseless, Loki suggests that now is the perfect time to kill Odin. Loki goes to Midgard and attempts to lift Mjolnir, but fails. Hidden in a shroud of invisibility, he watches as Shield interrogates Thor. When they are alone, Loki tells Thor that Odin has died due to the strain Thor put on him, and that he can never return to Asgard. Thor believes him, and it crushes him. When Loki returns to Asgard, Heimdall approaches, questioning why he, Heimdall, who sees all in the 9 realms, couldn't see Loki for a specific period of time. Loki brushes it off, using his silver tongue to talk his way out of it, as usual. But Heimdall doesn't fall for it. Later, he conspires with Lady Sif and the Warriors 3 to travel to Midgard, knowing full well that his deception has not been believed. Loki waits for the 4 to depart. Then he strides down the Rainbow Bridge towards the gate of the Bifrost. Before Heimdall can act, Loki, using his newly discovered Frostshine abilities, freezes him like an ice sculpture. Only his eyes are able to move. Seizing the staff, the key, Loki opens the Bifrost, allowing Laufey and his personal guard to enter Asgard. Heimdall watches in horror, powerless to stop them. Laufey enters the chamber where Odin is powerless in his Odin sleep, which, for those unfamiliar, is like a coma. Odin is recharging his body so he can continue to rule for a little longer. As Laufey raises his dagger, Loki plunges his own dagger into him, killing his biological father and saving his adopted father. Clearly, Laufey has never heard of Oedipus. Odin's guards enter just in time to see Loki's act of heroism and swiftly dispatch Laufey's personal guard. Now appearing as the hero of Asgard, Loki knows there's one last thing he must do. Ensure that Thor never returns to challenge his claim to the throne. We've seen Loki kill. He just killed Laufey, and we'll discuss a few other deaths at his hands shortly. We also know he is a skilled warrior. We see him fight the Jotun alongside Thor and the others. Later, in Thor Ragnarok, he expertly wields his double daggers. And in mythology, he devises the only weapon capable of killing Baldur, mistletoe arrow. Yes, that is a real thing. As Michelle Pfeiffer-Selena Kyle points out, mistletoe is poisonous. But above all, Loki is loyal. To his friends, to his family. He loves them. He is ambitious, yes. But he does not want to harm them. We see this in his reaction to Odin's failing health, to the devastation of losing Freya, and in the fact that, yes, he sends the Destroyer to kill Thor, but he is fully aware of how skilled Thor is. He knows there's a very good chance Thor will survive, which is why he doesn't do it himself. Instead, he uses an illusion to get close and drive the dagger into Thor's back. Literally. Thor becomes worthy to wield Mjolnir again, using one of the oldest tropes in heroic literature, like true love's kiss, sacrificing yourself to save another. With Mjolnir in hand, Thor stops the Destroyer and returns to Asgard. Loki panics. With Thor back and all of his deception falling apart, he knows that when Odin wakes, he'll be grounded for the rest of his life. And it's going to be a long life. So, what does he do? He opens the Bifrost at full force, pointing it at Jotunheim. The Bifrost connects the 9 realms through Yggdrasil, the Tree of Life. We confirm this in Thor the Dark World. When the Bifrost is pointed full force at one location for too long, it starts to tear that place apart. That is also why Heimdall did not leave the gate open earlier. Powerless to stop him, Thor and Heimdall watch in horror as Loki commits the partial genocide of the Jotun. I say partial because there's some nuance we need to consider. Jotun just means giant, and only those affected were the ones currently on Jotunheim, the home of the Frost Giants. There is also Muspelheim, home to Surtur and the Fire Giants, which we see in Thor Ragnarok. Some Jotun also live on Asgard and other realms, as they crossbreed with other beings. In fact, Odin is said to be partially Jotun, or to have reproduced with the Jotun in mythology, depending on the story you're reading. We also have Loki and his children. Those named in mythology are Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse, was born from Svadilfari, and Grobda, mother of 3 of Loki's children, Jormungandr, the world serpent, who lives in the ocean and eats his tail, causing Midgard to turn, Fenrir, the giant wolf, Hela, the goddess of death. Though in the MCU we see Hela not as Loki's child, but as Odin's firstborn. In some myths, Half of Hela is a beautiful maiden, and the other half a decaying corpse. Think Harvey Dent, Two-Face. Loki also has a wife, Sigyn. I talk about their love story and how Loki causes earthquakes in another video. Loki and Sigyn have 2 sons, Narfi and Vali. All that said, not every Jotun or frost giant was destroyed, only those present on Jotunheim at the time. The energy output is so immense that the Rainbow Bridge begins to crack, and the observatory falls into the depths of space. We learn in Thor Ragnarok that Asgard isn't a planet. It's more like an asteroid, or a fully contained ecosystem floating in space. As Thor and Loki jump from the observatory to the Rainbow Bridge, they are rescued by Odin, who has just awakened from his Odin sleep. But Odin can't save both of his sons. He has to choose. And he chooses Thor. That is the final nail in the coffin of Loki's existential crisis. He lets go, falling, presumably, to his death. From Infinity War, when the Guardians of the Galaxy find Thor after the Asgardian Ark is destroyed by Thanos, and, considering the Asgardians' visit to the Collector, at the end of Thor the Dark World, we can infer that Asgard exists in the same quadrant of the universe as Nowhere and the Kree Empire. With that in mind, and considering that the Asgardians don't acknowledge the explosion of the Ark, we can infer that Asgardians, and by extension Jotun, can survive in the vacuum of space for a time. Loki also has an extra advantage over Thor. Just like Elsa, the cold doesn't bother him anyway. We don't see it directly, but based on what happens next, Thanos picks up Loki, rescuing him. Additionally, considering Dr. Eric Selvig's possession during the end credits scene of Thor, we can infer that Loki is already, himself, possessed by the Mind Stone. That's right, Weirdlings. Just like Selvig and Hawkeye, Clint Barton, Loki was possessed by the Mind Stone. With that context in mind, let's look at the events of the Avengers. Through the connection between himself, the Mind Stone, and Selvig, Loki is able to return to Midgard via the Tesseract, also known as the Space Stone. Thanos, the true mastermind behind the Chitauri invasion, wanted Loki on Earth as a scapegoat. He already had the Mind Stone in his possession, but he was willing to use it to acquire the Power Stone. He was playing the long game. So, from the first moment we see Loki after his fall, in the mirror when he possesses Selvig, up until his own possession is terminated, Loki is not in control of his actions. Now, with that in mind, let's list the actions that were not, in fact, willingly committed by Loki. Possessing Selvig and Barton, extracting a man's eye for the retinal scanner, delivering the megalomaniacal Third Reich-style speech in front of the crowd, fighting Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor, the fight against Thor on the side of the mountain, which was observed by Odin through his ravens Hunin and Munin. The whole point of the spectacle was to be captured by S.H.I.E.L.D. Loki was buying time for Selvig and Barton to set up the portal on Stark Tower, the Shakespearean insult directed at Black Widow, the destruction of killing Coulson, which bought him time to escape, leading the Chitauri army. What finally snapped him out of it? Hulk, with his classic puny god moment. Hulk smash! You're probably wondering how Loki could have been controlled when he wasn't touching the scepter. Well, Selvig didn't have contact with it, at least not that we saw, and Barton remained under its influence long after his contact had ended. And I'm sure you all remember the briefing room scene. Steve says, "Little man in a suit, without a what are you?" Tony replies, "Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist." That entire scene is full of tension and hostility, up until Dr. Bruce Banner reaches for the scepter, which shows us that the Mind Stone doesn't have to make direct contact to influence someone's actions. Marvel and the MCU even have multiple storylines where mind control has been used as a defense. Jessica Jones did many things under the influence of Kilgrave, the Purple Man. It has already been established that her relationship with him was fully against her will, and it included both SA against Jessica and crimes by her hand through his influence. Also, in the MCU, Wanda Maximoff, Scarlet Witch, gets her powers from the Mind Stone itself, the same thing that allowed Thanos to puppeteer Loki. You're probably thinking, so? What about the series WandaVision? Using the powers given to her by the Mind Stone, Wanda is able to hold all of Westview, New Jersey under her spell. Except Agatha, but, she's a witch, and it was Agatha all along. So, like how Agatha manipulated Wanda's grief for her own gains, well, it was Thanos all along. It's not even a stretch. We see Thanos during the post-credits scene on the other side of the portal that Tony nearly died closing. Thanos proves that he knows who Tony is during the battle on Titan. Sacred Timeline Loki, as in the one that we observe through the entirety of the MCU, unrelated to the TVA and post-time heist. When he betrays Thanos, it's not a betrayal. He is protecting his people and doing what he does best, being a trickster. He, in a way, if you are being observant, confesses to being a puppet right before the final snap that sends him to Valhalla. If you Weirdlings can forgive Senator James Buchanan, Bucky Barnes, for killing his friend Howard Stark and Howard's wife Maria, while under the control of Hydra, then you should be able to forgive Loki for his actions while under the effects of the Mind Stone. It is another form of mind control. Yes, Tony has trouble forgiving him, but Steve understood the circumstances. Now, we could continue discussing the main continuity Loki. But, as I said, he is in Valhalla, feasting and fighting for the rest of eternity. Let's pivot to the Loki we follow in the series, the one working for the TVA, the one we are actually here to defend. During Infinity War, in the time heist, we see Loki pick up the Tesseract, while Tony experiences a mini heart attack, triggered by Scott manipulating the arc reactor. And then, Loki is picked up by the TVA. This Loki was never imprisoned in Asgard. But let's consider the scene where his cell goes from pristine to looking like a tornado hit it. We can use that as a window into the psyche of our Loki, lost, confused, and hurt. In the TVA, Loki discovers Freya's death and the destruction of Asgard. He's grieving. All the people he loved, he believes are gone. While watching World's End with Sylvie, meeting the other variants, and attempting to save he who remains, Loki begins to mature. We see it in the main continuity as well. Loki poses as Odin, becoming king of Asgard and putting Odin in a sort of nursing home. Asgard thrives under his rule, and Odin truly did need around-the-clock care. Thor even tells Loki, disguised as Odin, that Loki would have made a better king than Thor. In the second season, we see Loki not only working for the TVA, tracking down time criminals, but also saving entire timelines. The last few episodes, as Loki tries to prevent every universe in the multiverse from being spaghettified, he starts to time slip. Just like Phil Connors in Groundhog Day, Loki relives the end of the multiverse over and over and over again. He is the only one who remembers it. So, he learns. He problem solves. He spends 1,000 years trying to figure out how to stop the destruction of the multiverse. Eventually, he discovers that the only solution is to do it himself. At 1,900 years old, older than Thor, Loki makes the mature, selfless decision to save the multiverse by becoming the god of storytelling. So, now that we have an image and a timeline, let's look at the charges. Remember, Loki technically had the mind of a teenager. Charges: hijacking a plane and theft as D.B. Cooper. Let's add in that this was a dare, and if we charge Loki with this crime, we must also charge Thor and their much older companion, Heimdall. Treason, multiple counts. Patricide, Laufey's murder. However, this was to stop a regicide, Odin's murder, so it can be ignored. Attempted murder, sending the Destroyer to kill Thor and everyone in its way. Partial genocide of the Frost Giants. As I've already said, it was a partial genocide, but there's more nuance than that. You see, there are a few more things to consider. I just said that the murder of Laufey is ignored, due to the fact that it was to stop a regicide. But there's more. You see, Laufey's entering Asgard breaks the treaty that Odin referenced when banishing Thor. The only individuals on Asgard who are still alive and who know that Loki was responsible for Laufey's arrival are Loki himself and Heimdall. So, in the eyes of the Asgardian government, Laufey and his guards invaded Asgard to kill the Allfather while he was hospitalized. That is a declaration of war. Like a certain government official who rides horses topless and ordered his army to invade a country that used to be under the collective thumb of the communist government he is the dictator of. That was an act of war, a war that is still being fought to this day. Or a certain orange troll that orders the bombing of a government leader, who starts a new war, affects trade, and raises the price of gas. Or a country's navy bombing fishing ships off the coast of a different country that is way too far from the shores of the country that the Navy claims to represent, for the argument of stopping illegal immigration to be a logical defense for the actions. And like Lois states when interviewing Clark, abducting the leader of a government when you are a known citizen of another government is an act of war. For example, holding the president of another country hostage. Yes, illegally imprisoning someone, especially without a warrant, is considered holding them hostage. It is also an act of war. All of this is stated in the documents agreed to at the Geneva Convention held between the First and Second World Wars. I promise this tangent is almost over, and there is a point. You may be wondering why the United Nations, the UN, hasn't stepped in. I mean, isn't it their job to be an oversight committee and keep the world as a whole from plummeting into another war? Well, yes, but there are few countries, including the one the aforementioned Orange Troll is the leader of, that don't have to answer to the United Nations, that have immunity, in a sense, that can do whatever the F they want, apparently. This is the darkest timeline. So, how does all of that defend Loki? First, I would like to apologize to anyone who was affected by the bombs. Before Fat Man and Little Boy were dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, pamphlets were dropped and warned in Japanese to evacuate the cities on specific days. The government and the citizens both believed it was a trick. Now, I'm not condoning the dropping of atomic bombs. What I am saying is that during times of war, certain actions can be defended. Yes, Loki's motives were selfish. However, it could be argued that he was defending the realm and committing an act of war. Therefore, even the destruction of Jotunheim can be ignored. The events of the Avengers were ignored because they were not Loki's own actions. Finally, we have the theft of the Tesseract. That gives us fewer than a dozen counts against Loki, most of which are misdemeanors or crimes of passion. So, Weirdlings of the jury, it is now up to you to decide. Is Loki guilty or innocent? And what should his sentence be? Leave your verdict in the comments below. As for me, I think Loki has already been sentenced to eternity in solitude, watching the whole multiverse go on without him.